when you move students together at this pace, when you identify gaps in their knowledge through these assessments, but use them only to say you're smart and you're dumb, and not to say, well, let's go repair those gaps, you're pretty much dooming students to not being able to have a strong foundation and get to where they want to go. And so there's a couple of things there. Failure should not be stigmatized in this sense. It's a learning opportunity. Work on that thing. Get better at it. The other dimension, which I think is even more in line with the Silicon Valley philosophy, is every time we get weirded out by our school system, we had more structure to it. We had more testing. We had more this. We handhold the teachers even more. And that probably does de-risk some of the worst things that are going on, but it also mitigates some of the downside. And it's actually crazy that a lot of entrepreneurs, when they actually want to do something truly innovative, they have to drop out of school. That school is saying that's not a learning experience, even though it's a far deeper learning experience than anything else. If you have realities where every student's working at their own pace, they're mastering concepts before they're moving on. Class time is not for passive lectures, it's for active problem solving. You interact with your peers, you interact with your teachers. You're assessed not just on academic competency, but also how good a peer tutor are you? What is your portfolio of creative works? And then in that model, and this is kind of, it's jarring for a traditional school model, is, wait, I'm really inspired by cell division. I want to go do some cancer research for a month. That's all I want to do for a month. Right now, our school system says, no, 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 no. You have an AP exam tomorrow. No doing the research for yourself. And in this model, you can say, no, you should. And that's actually where you're going to do most of your learning. If human beings are together, should you be giving lectures at all? Should that be nothing but interactivity or these change-ups where you're doing peer-to-peer stuff? And if you do feel that there's a part of the learning process that might require explanations or something that akin to a lecture, isn't it much better if it is on demand, if it is granular? And it's true, if you can pause and repeat it as much as you need.
How do you deploy essentially a network intelligence into what you're doing is both the direction of teaching and learning from other folks in your network. And by sharing with what problems they're working on and helping them work on that, and also vice versa, is actually the kind of thing that is, to some degree, the secret sauce, maybe not so secret here, but the secret sauce of Silicon Valley. Because part of the reason why we have such a hotbed of innovation here is because it is common that people will talk to each other about, oh, how did you solve this problem? Or how did you think about this? Or I'm trying to work on this. Who do you know that I should talk to about this? Or do you know something about this? And having some conversation about that. And so, for me, for example, people sometimes ask me, who do I look to as a mentor? And it's actually, there's a whole panoply of people. And it depends on different topics. Because it's like, oh, if I want to talk to, about kind of how platforms work, I'll talk to Mark Andreessen. If I want to talk to, kind of enterprise software, I'll talk to Anil Busri. Like, there's a set of folks about like, okay, this is the person who can help me understand this and this particular problem that I'm trying to solve. And I think that we do that across the valley, which is, it's that network that makes the innovation. The culture is extremely helpful, but the network is what amplifies that innovation. And part of doing that is to both be helping other people with their problems, whether it's teaching, mentoring, problem solving, conspiring, collaborating, all of these metaphors work, and then vice versa.
We have these incredibly creative, curious, collaborative kids at 4 or 5 years old, and you put them into a system and you immediately say, shh, stare at the teacher, take notes, be essentially passive and be told what to do for the next 12 to 16 years. And then you come out of the other end, you get a job with Reid, and he's like, be creative, be collaborative. And these kids kind of, so I think there's a lot to be said in the classrooms that we've observed where, because it's not lecture-based anymore, because the students are all learning at their own pace, sometimes they're multi-age groups. There's a school, Marlboro School in Los Angeles, where there's multi-age girls, 7th through 12th grade, all in the same classroom, tutoring each other. You get that benefit that humans naturally want. In nature, humans were never sequestered into these artificial age batches. They had extended families, they had cousins, they had siblings. And so you start to have the younger kids get mentored, the older kids do the mentoring, everyone acts more mature. Today, tests, and this is what we all assume tests are they're kind of these snapshots at one point in your life. They're not used as kind of a diagnostic to say, hey, you're a little weak on this, why don't you get better? They're used to judge you. And they tend to be these high stakes things. And they just are kind of a sample of what you, assuming it's even a good test, which most of them aren't, but assuming it's a good test, it's a sample of what you do happen to know at that moment. And so we think what a test really should be or an assessment or a diagnostic is an ongoing narrative with the student, where it's not just what you know at that moment, it's your knowledge state, and your knowledge state decays over time. How does that change? How is it different for one student to another? How can we give you activities that help you improve your knowledge state? And it's not just your current state, but it's also the narrative of how you got there. I could imagine in 10 years a university not just caring about knowledge state, your SAT scores or whatever else, but to say, I want to see what was the perseverance of that kid? I want to actually do some big data mining on these. Which kids, when they were having trouble, they came back and they were able to race ahead. I want to see the kids that actually spent a lot of time despite all of the other things they're doing. They go to math class, it's antagonistic, the teacher, they don't want to do it. You go to sports class, you go to wrestling practice or football practice, they're all engaged, even though the coach is making them do something they don't want to do. Go do some wind sprints. They'll, yes, sir, and they'll go do it. And the reason why it's not about judging you, it's about improving yourself. And it's all about the coach being on your side to make you better and not assess tests to just make you feel silly.
One of the things that I think will certainly be happening is the evolution of credentialing, because I think a lot more, essentially, various forms of micro-credentials are important. There could be, like, oh, you got this particular concept, or manage this particular skill, or, those sorts of things I think you'll see a lot more of. Part of how endorsements on LinkedIn work is it's in a sense the extreme version of micro-credentialing, because it's kind of like, oh, Sal thinks this person's really good at educating. Okay, well, that actually may be, that's a good credential from the people who understand, kind of the rigor in which Sal thinks about these things. And so part of what I think is going to happen is, as opposed to kind of just a few simple, very big credentials, they'll get to many more that have potentially much more specific and deep meaning, where the credentialing is a composition of those. I don't think the notion of credentialing goes away. I think it evolves in that direction.
Right now, education is kind of muddled between learning and socialization and credentialing. And I think a world where you have separate, decoupled credentials, micro-credentials that actually have stronger signaling value, is one where it does kind of send shockwaves through the entire ecosystem. Because once you have a reality, I think the Harvards and the Stanfords will always be okay. People will always want to go to them. There's a networking that you get to be there. You kind of get to join a club. It's a good life experience. The problem is, in a lot of the ecosystem, you have very smart kids. They go to a region. Most of the schools in the world are not ones that people have heard of. A very smart kid goes into debt that's not cancelable by bankruptcy. They show up at the school. They could get a 4.0 GPA. They might learn the material as good as the Stanford grad, as good as the MIT grad, but Google still won't interview them. And that's because despite that money and that investment in time, that credential is actually a weak credential. It has weak signaling value. And so in a reality where you have decoupled micro-credentials, it's a way for the Harvard grad to also prove that they did learn some tangible skills while they were there. But it's a hugely empowering thing for the student who goes to the less known, because they can now show that they know whatever topic X, Y, or Z, and it could be vocational things, it could be very intellectual things. They know it as good as the Ivy League grad.
One of the things that's really special, I think, generally about the internet is it reconfigures space, right? So what is essentially local or near to you, adjacent to you on the online world has nothing to do with what necessarily is really adjacent to you, like your neighbor and so forth. And so whether or not it's the availability of great educational resources, whether or not it's the pattern by which you find someone who has expertise or exchange views, or you find the right information that helps you solve this particular problem. And part of the reason that when I came back from Oxford, I realized that I was going to dedicate my entire career to the online portion of the world, and even a lot of the philanthropy I do, Kiva, Premel's in the audience here, as a way of doing that is because it transforms that sense of adjacency. And part of very good economic systems are the efficiency by which these resources are put together in which you produce much better things. Right? And so efficiency in education, efficiency in collaboration, efficiency in work opportunities, those are the kinds of things where I don't think that means that still an intense local physical network is still really valuable, but it adds a lot of value in the entire world.